Looks good.
Okay, everybody can see it?
Yes. You want to let us
Okay.
see you too, Peter? Show your
Yes, of
video?
course.
Welcome. From
Hello,
Costa
everybody. Good evening. So first of all, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you some information about birds and bird watching in Costa Rica. So first, I'm going to briefly introduce myself and I represent Aratinga Tours, which was founded in 2004. It's a Costa Rican-based travel agency, licensed, recognized by the government, and we specialize in birding and bird photography, which, well, it used to be birding 20 years ago, but the dynamic of the birding tours kind of are changing a little bit. So in the last 10 years, the demand for photographing birds has become also very important. So in that way, photography has become more important, and the dynamic of the birding tours in general have changed a little bit. This is me about 15 years ago. I look a little bit different now. The gear has also changed. I'm originally from Belgium, and well, many people have asked me what made me get to Costa Rica, and it's a question I've been asked a lot, and I will answer it again for you. It's that my father came here actually before me. He moved to Costa Rica in the early 90s. My parents were divorced, and he was looking for a new challenge. So he was offered a job in Costa Rica, and he moved to Costa Rica. So my first trip to Costa Rica was in the early 90s. I was in Belgium already bird watching a bit. I came to Costa Rica. I was completely overwhelmed with the amount of birds and the beauty of the birds. And it made me decide to study biology. So I studied biology in Belgium. I am a biologist, but I couldn't really find an interesting job as a biologist in Belgium. I had a few jobs, but I always ended up as in an office, and I didn't like that too much. So my father back then had already started in Costa Rica. He quit his job that he had been offered before, and he started a lodge, Talari Mountain Lodge, which is in southern Costa Rica, near San Isidro del General. And he offered me to join him and to help him in the lodge. This was a lodge where already birders were coming, where there was a lot of bird watching going on. There were good birds in the area. And so that's how I came into contact with birdwatching tourism. And I thought, well, I can turn my passion into a job. So why don't I do this professionally? So that's more or less in a nutshell how I started with Aratinga Tours and how I ended up in Costa Rica. So before I show you some pictures of some beautiful birds in Costa Rica, I want to talk a little bit about biodiversity in general and bird diversity in Costa Rica. Because in this table, you can see some interesting numbers. You can see that Costa Rica, more or less, is 0.01% of what is the surface of the world. And nevertheless, the diversity is extremely high. 4.37% of all mammals known to science live in Costa Rica. 2.49% of the reptiles and 2.73% of the amphibians known in the world live in Costa Rica. But the number of the birds are even more interesting, because there's 948 birds reported in Costa Rica. And well, this is an estimate, 10,000. I mean, the numbers always change. You know how it is, the taxonomy and the names always change. But the percentage is pretty accurate. There's about 9% of the birds that are known in the world live in Costa Rica. Nevertheless, it's only 0.01% of the surface of the world. So this is really unique. There's lots of species, and especially birds, concentrated in a very small area, which is Costa Rica. If you look at the bird diversity, just by putting the total number of birds to the country, this is what this graph illustrates. Obviously, if you're looking at the South American countries that are famous for their high biodiversity in South America, like Peru and Colombia, they really stick out. Obviously, Brazil also, Ecuador. Costa Rica has only 900. Well, it has to be 948, but it's the general idea of the graph that we're looking at. So obviously we can't compete. Costa Rica can't compete to Peru and Colombia and stuff, because Peru and Colombia and Brazil, they're huge countries, right? So, but if you look at bird diversity relative to the size of the country, we get a completely different view. So this graph illustrates this. If you're looking at the number of birds per country, per 100 square kilometer of that country, you see that Costa Rica really sticks out. So this illustrates again that, especially for birds, because we're looking at the number of birds here, there's lots of birds concentrated in a tiny area in Costa Rica. In the next graph, I'm trying to explain a little bit. I'm gonna mention some of the factors explaining this high bird diversity. So first of all, I wanna orientate you a little bit where Costa Rica is. So Costa Rica is in the southern part of Central America, next to Nicaragua in the north and to Panama in the southeast. And Central America is lying between North and South America. So there's been an influence from avifauna from both North America and South America. So Costa Rica and Panama and especially the southern part of Central America, which has very high bird diversity, can be considered as a bridge between North and South America. And if you're looking at the map of Costa Rica in detail with some geographical features, we can see that both oceans of each side of on the west we have Pacific Ocean, on the east we have the Atlantic Ocean, and you can see a mountain going more or less parallel to the coastlines, going from northwest to southeast. These mountains actually continue in Western Panama. It's not really illustrated on that map, but the mountains continue. And this mountain chain is really important if you want to explain the high biodiversity in Costa Rica. First of all, is this mountain chain this is not the Andes. This is an isolated mountain chain. If you go farther into Panama, you will get into lowland area, and you have to cross maybe 200 kilometers before getting to the Colombian border and before getting into the Andes. If you're going north, if you go farther north, you get into Nicaragua and you get into lowlands also. So we're looking at an isolated mountain. This isolation means that a lot of the birds that have reached those mountains have become isolated, have evolved, have adapted to local conditions, and have evolved into unique species, endemic species to Costa Rica. And many of those species also live in Western Panama, since this mountain chain continues in Western Panama. So that's a way in which the mountains have contributed to the biodiversity, the bird diversity in Costa Rica, because it has created a lot of unique species that basically live in those mountains, have colonized those mountains. But also what this mountain chain does is it separates Costa Rica into a Caribbean lowlands east of the mountains and Pacific lowlands west of the mountains. So birds that live in the lowlands, they are and live in this part in South Pacific lowlands, are they are not in connection with the birds, with the populations on this side of the country, because there's these mountains in between. They're not going to cross these mountains. So we will see further on how this also influences in bird diversity. And this is a very important map, I think. I use a lot. It's a rough division of ecosystems. I've talked about the mountains already, and this is the orange part, the highlands, going from northwest to southeast, separating the country into lowland areas. On the east side, we have Caribbean lowlands here in the white, and actually the lowlands on the western part, west of the highlands, can be divided into two parts. On the northwest here in green is a dry northwest. This is a very dry area, completely different to the rest of Costa Rica. We're talking tropical dry forest here, while the rest is more evergreen forest. It's completely different, a completely different ecosystem with a completely different set of birds. And completely different to the southern part of the Pacific, which is more evergreen, similar to also Caribbean lowlands. So we have tropical rainforest here, tropical rainforest here. We have highlands here, and we have tropical dry forest here. This is a map that's very useful in building an itinerary, a birding itinerary in Costa Rica. If you want to see as much as birds possible in Costa Rica, you want to include as many ecosystems in Costa Rica. So you want to, ideally is to include at least one of these eco zones on a birding tour in Costa Rica in order to see as much birds as possible. So in what follows, I'm gonna go more into detail, mentioning some details about every ecozone. And also I'm gonna show you some iconic, some typical birds of every ecozone. So we're gonna start with the highlands. So the highlands is the part in orange here on the map. So the highlands are the natural vegetation in the highlands is the cloud forest of which you see here a picture of. Typical for the highlands is that there's a lot of presence of epiphytes, which are plants growing on top of the trees, which you can see very well here. It's full of moss. It has bromeliads, it has ferns, it even has orchids growing on top of the trees. There's always like some fog, some clouds going through it, which gives it some kind of a mystical aspect. In terms of that diversity, important to know is that the highlands have high endemism. So there's a lot of birds that only live in those mountains and nowhere else in the world because of the isolation, what I explained before. In general, the highlands are less diverse in species compared to the lowlands, but there's a lot of unique species, a lot of endemism. And of course, the highlands is home to resplendent quetzal, of which you see a picture here. This is not an endemic bird. The resplendent quetzal is actually a bird that has a distribution going from Mexico all the way to Western Panama. But in Costa Rica, it's probably the best country to see it because it's quite accessible. It's a relatively common bird, and it's a bird since so many people want to see it. It's intensively monitored. So normally, if you go with a good local guide, they know where they are, and the chance to see it is normally pretty high. Here you see a picture of a male. The male has a typical long tail coverts. The green long feathers you see, technically it's not its tail, it's got a white tail. If the bird turns around, you would normally see the white tail, but we're looking at the back now. But it has two long tail coverts and two shorter tail coverts that stick out. And actually, obviously, if you want to see the quetzal, you want to see it with the long tail coverts, because there's like a cycle in his in some periods of the year, the male quetzals have the complete tail, but in other times of the year, it doesn't. That's because the male also helps to breed out the eggs and to raise the youngs. So the quetzals actually they breed in a dead tree, in a hole. They take over like an old woodpecker nest, and the female would lay two eggs, and both male and female will breed out the eggs, and both male and female will also bring food to the young. So this means that the males goes in and out of the nest all the time, and so the long feathers, the tail coverts, will become damaged and will eventually fall off. Normally they breed around this time of the year is breeding time. So about April, May is when they breed. And so after that, most of the males you see will not have a complete tail. They will grow back on around October, November. So best time of the year to see resplendent quetzal with a full complete tail will be between November and April. There's a lot of hummingbirds in the highlands. Actually, in Costa Rica, there's 52 species of hummingbirds. Here we have a fiery-throated hummingbird. It's common in the highlands, and here you see the distribution map, which is taken from the Merlin app, and you can see the distribution more or less representing the mountains I showed you on the map before. So this is one of the examples of the birds that only live in the high mountains of Costa Rica and West Panama. There's about 50 species that only live in this mountain range. Fiery-throated hummingbirds. This is volcano hummingbirds. This is the smallest bird of Costa Rica, only weighing 2 grams. This is a nice male. The males have this nice colorful corrugates, this colorful throat. 2 grams. You can also see the distribution here. There's actually 3 populations, as you can see on this map. This one is the Talamanca population. If you look in the bird guide of Costa Rica, you will also see 3 subspecies of volcano hummingbirds. One subspecies here, this is the Poa subspecies, this is the Irazu subspecies, and this is the Talamanca subspecies. And every subspecies, the male of every subspecies have a different coloration in the throat. So it's gonna be probably the subspecies level is gonna become a species level probably in a few years, because as you can see, those populations are isolated, and there's already the males already look different because the throat coloration is different. So maybe in a few years, we will not be talking about volcano hummingbirds, but we will be talking about 3 other species, probably Talamanca hummingbirds, Irazu hummingbird, and Poas hummingbird. This is not the best picture, but I wanted to put it in also because this is a very colorful bird also that lives in the highlands of Costa Rica and Western Panama. This is called golden-browed Chlorofonia. This is a male, very intensely colored. Normally they high up in the trees. You hear them all the time. If you're in the highlands, they go like, but they're hard to see. They're green, so they blend in very well with the foliage. They stay up high, normally high up in the trees. Sometimes they come down. They feed on these Ericaceae, fruits often. And there's a place, it's called Quetzal Paradise Lodge in the Highlands, where they have those plants in the garden. And this was actually taken in the garden of this lodge, Quetzal Paradise Lodge. This is northern emerald toucanet, also a very beautiful bird. The smallest toucan species of Costa Rica. There's 6 species of toucans in Costa Rica. Northern emerald toucanet isn't endemic for Costa Rica and West Panama. It spreads out all the way to the northern part of Central America also. But I wanted to add it also in this presentation since it's so pretty. A few years back, this was called emerald toucanet. It's been split into northern emerald toucanet and southern emerald toucanet in South America. There's a very similar species that's called the southern emerald toucanet, but the southern emerald toucanet actually has a white throat. So this one has a very nice blue throat, the northern emerald toucanet from Central America. Then the second ecozone I want to mention is the Caribbean lowlands, which is the white part east of the highlands. The Caribbean lowlands, the typical original or natural vegetation is the evergreen tropical rainforest, of which here you see a little bit of an impression. Walking inside of a rainforest is a nice experience. It's characterized by a very high biodiversity. However, walking through the rainforest can be very challenging because of you're really basically looking at a green wall. Light conditions are pretty challenging. So if you expect to see a lot of birds inside of a rainforest, well, I can tell you it's very challenging to see actually birds. You hear a lot of birds, but a lot of birds are very hard to see inside of the rainforest. Most of the birds actually are seen if you're at the edge of the rainforest, if you're like walking in garden in semi-open areas where it's easier to see birds. Rainforest birding is really challenging. The Caribbean side of the Caribbean lowlands, this ecozone has a lot of affinity with South America, which means that some of those typical exotic groups of birds that you know from South America, like the toucans, like the antbirds, wood creepers, manakins, are very well represented in the Caribbean lowlands. So let's look at some of the iconic birds of the Caribbean lowlands. This is the colored Aracari. This is a bird that actually I have lately in my garden. One even entered in the house last week. It was kind of a challenge to get it out. This is the second smallest toucan of Costa Rica, the colored Aracari. Quite common in the Caribbean lowlands, and well, even here in the Central Valley where I live, they are often seen in the gardens at the edge of the city. This one was taken in Laguna de Lagarto Lodge in northern part of Costa Rica, almost in Nicaragua, a place where they have a very good setup for feeders, where you can take very good pictures of 3 species of toucans. And maybe an interesting thing to mention about colored Aracari, that it has a very obvious like twin species, which you see a picture of here, which is called the fiery-billed Aracari. So this is how the mountain change really enhances the biodiversity in Costa Rica, because they obviously, both of those Aracaris, fiery-billed Aracari and colored Aracari, morphologically, they look a lot like each other. They have the same shape of bill. They are of the same size, and actually their coloration is almost identically except for their bills. So it's obvious that they have a common ancestor. The ancestor came from South America, came in Costa Rica, part of the population ended up on the Caribbean side, part of the population ended up on the Pacific side. And both of the populations became isolated because there's mountains in between. So there was no gene flow between both populations. So the population that got here on the south part really adapted to local conditions and evolved into a unique species. So that's how this mountain chain really, in a way, enhanced bird diversity. Another very iconic bird and endangered bird of the Caribbean lowlands is great green macaw. This bird is actually critically endangered. The last years, it's doing a little better. There's two macaw species in Costa Rica. We have great green macaw and scarlet macaw. Great green macaw is by far more rare than the scarlet macaw. That has still some healthy populations. The problem with great green macaw is it depends heavily on wild almond trees, and wild almond trees are among the best tropical hardwoods of the rainforest. So the demand for the wood has been very high. Luckily, in Costa Rica, the cutting down of wild almond tree has been banned. So that's why they have been able to recover a little bit more. So if you go to the Sarapiquí area, if you go to Tortuguero, normally you should be able to see great green macaws. They're very noisy, so if they're around, you can normally hear them, and when they fly over, they're big and colorful birds, so they should be able to be seen. When they're perched in the trees, even though they're big and colorful, if it's a green tree, it can be still very challenging to see them. But normally, if you go to the right area, you should be able to see them. Here we have white-colored manakin. Manakins are not easy to see. They're always inside of the rainforest. They will not come out to feeders or anything. You will really need to go inside of the rainforest to see them. Especially the males have bright and very intense colorations. The females are more camouflage colors, because the females are the ones that obviously that make the nest, that lay the eggs and raise the youngs. The males don't help with the nesting. So that's why the males are so brightly colored, and the females are camouflaged. And the male mannequins are also famous for their dances, for their displays. So the males actually live all the time. They're dancing in legs, what they call legs. Legs is like a big concentration of displaying males. And all year long, you can see males dancing, because it's only the best dancer that will be that the females choose to mate with. So for the males, it's very important to be good dancers. So that's why the whole year long they're practicing. It's pretty neat to see this, especially now is when the mannequins become more accessible, because now is the time when the females will go to the legs to choose the best dancer, and so the males are really concentrated or focused on the females, and that's the reason why they're like less shy and more and they're easier to approach. And the same story can be told. The story that I told you with the colored Aracari. The same story can be told with the white-colored manakin and orange-colored manakin. White-colored manakin from the Caribbean lowlands, orange-colored manakin from the South Pacific lowlands. The mountain in between separates them. The ancestor of this species colonized Caribbean side, colonized South Pacific side, and so the South Pacific population adapted to local conditions, was separated, was isolated, and evolved into a unique species. So orange-colored manakin and white-colored manakin. This is black-crested coquette. This is really a flying jewel. This is a tiny little bird. There's so much beauty concentrated in this little creature. I mean, look at the details. It's got this beautiful crest. It's got all these patterns. It's like little golden dots on his belly. This is not an easy bird to see. Hummingbirds, there's of the 52 hummingbirds, this is one of the hardest one because I mean, most of the hummingbirds you can see at feeders. The feeders are normally places where there's a lot of competition, and a lot of those hummingbirds are very aggressive. And this is a very tiny one, and it's just not tolerated at the feeders. It will be chased away by the bigger ones, and you really have to look at them at blooming trees. Or there's a shrub. It's called verbena or powderweed with little purple flowers that are sometimes planted in the gardens. Like a good example is Arenal Observatory Lodge, where they have a lot of those powderweeds. This picture was taken in Arenal Observatory Lodge. And then at certain areas, you can expect this beautiful black crested coquette. Well, something went wrong here. I don't know what. It should have a picture of broad-billed motmot and keel-billed motmot. Very pretty birds of Caribbean lowlands. So let's jump to the Southern Pacific lowlands. This is the pinkish area here. Also characterized by evergreen tropical rainforest, similar to Caribbean lowlands. But we have an interesting fact is that we have also an isolation factor here. Why, and the reason why we have some endemism, because there's tropical rainforests all the way to here, because this is tropical dry forest, the green area. If you go north, we bump against these the mountains. Obviously, this is the ocean here, and if you go farther into Panama, we will eventually get into tropical dry forest or a drier area also. So this tropical rainforest area will continue a little bit into western Panama. So actually, there's a piece of tropical rainforest that is isolated here also. This part that I'm pointing out here is tropical rainforest where some species have colonized and have become isolated. So it's the same story really of the endemism here in the highlands. So the isolation aspects have led to endemism in this area. There's about 20 bird species in this area, in the Southern Pacific lowlands, that only live there and nowhere else in the world. So we're going to look at some of those. So this is the fiery-billed Aracari, which I have mentioned before. This is like the twin species of the colored Aracari. Can only be seen in southern Costa Rica and western Panama. This is white-crested coquette. Similar, probably the same story as white-colored mannequin and orange-colored mannequin and colored Aracari and fiery-billed Aracari. So this is the twin species of the black-crested coquette. Also a very beautiful bird with some really special details here. A little crest here, even harder to see than the black-crested coquette actually. And this is the powderweed I told you about. So also this bird is not cannot be seen at the feeders. Should be seen at the powderweed in the gardens, in some of the gardens. This is a spot crown Aphonia, very pretty bird. There's a lot of these Aphonias in Costa Rica that actually almost completely look like each other. They're blue. They have this yellow patch here, this yellow crown. Some of them are very hard to distinguish. Calls are good tools to distinguish them. This spot crown Aphonia, you can barely see the spots actually here on the forehead. It only lives in southern Costa Rica and western Panama. This is another example example of a typical bird of this area, and this is actually one of the main and of the mainland endemics of Costa Rica. There's four species of mainland endemic species that only live in Costa Rica and nowhere else in the world. I say mainland endemics because there's also an island way out in the ocean. It's called the Cocos Island, 500 kilometers or something from the shore. It's actually part of the Galapagos archipelago, and there's four species there that only live in that island and nowhere else. It's Cocos finch, Cocos flycatcher, and Cocos cuckoo. So 3 species. But of the mainland endemics, there's 4 species, and this is an example. This species, the black-cheeked ant tanager, has a very tiny distribution range. Only this peninsula, it's called the Peninsula de Osa Peninsula, and the Golfo Dulce area is where it lives. Nowhere else in the world. And this is the orange-colored manakin that I already mentioned. This is a bird that can be seen in Parque Nacional Carrara or in the area around Los Cocingos, near San Isidro del General. Not an easy bird. I'm mentioning in here also the photographer Alvaro Gutierrez, which is a local guide we use a lot. This is a very good birder in the Carrara area that often knows the location of some of the local targets like orange-colored manakin. This is also a very good photographer. Also a picture of the same local guide, Alvaro Gutierrez. This is mangrove hummingbird. This is actually another example of a mainland endemic. This bird only lives in the mangroves of Costa Rica, nowhere else in the world. It actually specializes on a flower, on a white flower of a mangrove tree. So it really depends heavily on that flower. Sometimes it comes out a little bit under the mangroves to feed on other trees, but it's normally you should look for it in the mangroves. Also, very hard bird to see. And then I'm gonna talk about the dry Northwest. This picture, if you show this picture to somebody, you wouldn't really think that this would be Costa Rica. This looks a little bit like an African landscape, but this is also Costa Rica. The northwestern part looks completely different to the rest of Costa Rica. This is tropical dry forest. There's intense or extensive savannas and cattle farms, and the landscape is just completely different. And this area has more affinity with the northern part of Central America. And it has a completely different set of birds, of which I will show you some now. This is the turquoise-browed motmot, a typical bird of tropical dry forest. This is probably the most intensely colored motmot of all motmots in Costa Rica. If you look closely to the beak, you see it has some dirt on its beak. That's an indication that this bird was probably breeding or making its nest. They make a nest like the kingfishers. They will make a little hole in like a vertical earthen wall or something next to a river or somewhere else, and they will dig out a little hole and make a nest there. So when they do that, they normally have some dirt, some earth on their beak, like you can see now in this picture. This is Pacific screech owl. This was taken on a tour with Alvaro Gutierrez, the photographer of the mangrove hummingbird and the orange-colored manakin. This is a pretty common owl species in northwestern Costa Rica. The good thing of the local guides like Alvaro Gutierrez, he knows their day roost, and so he takes us there, and so we can take pictures of the owls. when they're roosting. This guy has his eyes already open. This was around 4:35. He was slowly waking up. So with the natural light, we could take a good picture of this very pretty, very well camouflaged owl. Doesn't look camouflaged because of the green background, but if you look at it with this tree in the background, it will be very hard to see. And well, this is actually one of my favorite birds. This is the long-tailed manakin. This is probably the hardest manakin to see in Costa Rica. It's extremely fast and extremely shy. I was very lucky with this shot. I was by myself. Normally, if I'm guiding and there's a lot of people around, there's always somebody moving around. There's always somebody talking. So these kind of pictures you normally can take only when there's only one or two people, because these birds are very shy. This is long-tailed manakin. The male has very long, nice, two long-tail feathers and very nice coloration. Long-tailed manakin. They have also very interesting displays. They make dances. The males even do synchronized dances. Right now is the perfect time to see them do that and to actually get close to them. Black-headed trogon is quite common, quite easy to see in the tropical dry forest. Very colorful birds, the typical light blue eye ring. That's how you can identify them. There's a species that looks like it's a lot, the gartered trogon, especially the female looks a lot like black-throated trogon, but the gartered trogon will have a yellow eye ring. This is the lesser ground cuckoo. This picture was also taken with local guide Alvaro Gutierrez. This is a very shy bird also, very hard bird to see. It's always hiding in thick vegetation, and it takes a lot of effort to get it out like that and to make a good picture of it. Lesser ground cuckoo. Nice about this is you can see the nice blue eye ring, which some of the antbirds also have. So what I want to talk to you about now is just tell you some general things about our service. So Aratinga Tours has a lot of experience offering birding itineraries to birders all over the world. Really, on our website, you can see some sample itineraries. What is very popular, especially what we sell a lot in Europe, is itineraries for individual travelers that travel pretty much independently with their own rent-a-car, and they drive from one place to the other. We give them a detailed route description. We hook them up with local guides here and there. But tours can also be done with private guides, with private transportation. So there's a lot of options. On our website, you can see some sample itineraries to give you an idea of what is possible. Here is an example of a tour that we call Birding Costa Rica's 4 ecozones. So here you can see the 4 ecozones I illustrated to you, and this is more or less a tour, so covering all 4 ecozones of Costa Rica. Obviously, we also offer customized itineraries, taking into account your personal needs, your personal target lists, or whatever you want to do. So there's a lot of options that we are willing to work on. And I just wanted to end with mentioning that we have a lot of expertise. We're doing this 20 years. I do about 6 tours, mostly with Dutch-speaking people, 6 2-week tours a year. I'm doing this for 20 years, so I've done about 120 tours in Costa Rica. I know all the hotels, I know all the areas. I know a lot of local guides that I hook up my clients with, and local guides are definitely very useful in finding the harder birds, finding the day roosts of the owls and stuff. Um, so here you find some of our contact information, and well, I think I have said, well, I have talked about the most important things of and I showed you some of the iconic birds of Costa Rica. And obviously, if there are questions, I'll be willing to answer them. And I would like to thank you, everybody, for your attention. And we're ending with this very nice speckled tanager, a picture I took in southern Costa Rica, one of the many very colorful, intensively colored tanagers of Costa Rica.
Fantastic.
So,
Yeah, fantastic. Very nice.
yeah, you're welcome.
Love the
I got lucky then with the golden browed chlorofonia because it did come down to those trees when we stopped to see the spotted wood quail and they had some of those trees. So it usually stays up pretty high.
Yes, yes, you have to be lucky with them. They're hard to see. They come down when those Ericacia shrubs are fruiting. Then they come down. They love those fruits. You see a lot of pictures you see on the internet are taken on those shrubs. A lot of the pictures on the internet of golden browed chlorophonias are actually with these small berries in their beak. So yeah, this is a very intensely colored bird, and that is actually hard to see. But now is a good time of the year because of the fruiting of those little shrubs.
Very nice. Actually, Tammy Martin had said, great talk. Perhaps the photo of the lesser ground cuckoo was taken on the trip I was on. Saw it on a rainy day. Very cool bird. So I don't know if that's the same trip or not, but and
Yes,
it was
Tammy,
great
you're
tour.
right. You're right. This was on the day with you and Debbie. On the rainy day, you could tell that the lesser ground cuckoo was completely wet. But yes, that was on that day with you guys.
Yeah. And Bree said, great presentation. Delcy Rodriguez said, wonderful information. She went to Costa Rica in 2014 and was very impressed. Pura vida.
Pura vida. Yes, actually,
Pura
that's
vida.
the typical. That's the a saying that is very typical in Costa Rica. Only it's used in Costa Rica. Pura vida. It's the right answer to any question.
There you go.
If
You got
somebody
it
talks
all
to
set.
you in Costa Rica, and you don't know what they're saying, just say pura vida, and you will get a smile in return.
There you go. That's the key. Very good. Oh, do you know, as a biologist, the little blue circle around the eyes of the ant birds, is there any reason for that blue? You know, you had talked it was on the cuckoo and on the ant birds. Do you know anything
Well,
about that color? It just seems interesting that those are the
yeah,
ground cuckoo, they're all the ground birds have that blue.
I think what they mimic is to be like a bigger bird and to maybe scare away a potential predator. That could be an explanation.
Mm. Good. Any other questions? Very good. So I have a question. When we were up in the cloud forest, and a lot of the coffee, where they were growing the coffee, they edged it with that porter weed. Is that is that just each person's individual thing, or is there a movement to try to put more of that into the country for the hummingbirds?
Well, it's a popular plant to grow in the garden, and it's easy to grow. I mean, you just take a stick and you put it in the ground, and it will start growing. So in some for some people, it just, and they don't even know it attracts hummingbirds. They just like the plant in their gardens. But in a lot of the birding lodges, it's been planted with that specific reason, to attract hummingbirds, and especially to attract like the smaller hummingbirds that are not allowed to the feeders, like the snowcap and the coquettes and the violet-headed hummingbirds, is where you those are only the only places where you actually can see those kind of small, tiny hummingbirds.
Mm. Very good. Now, as far as we just did a tour with you, and we hired a driver, and I'm happy to have the driver do the driving. With some of the country was a little, of course, we went to maybe some of the rougher country, not rough, but we're kind of spoiled here in America with our pavement, so it was kind of nice to have somebody driving, and that's nice to have that option. So just want to point that out. All right, any other questions? We love the birds. They're beautiful birds. So Thome-Barrett said, has Costa Rica changed its feeding station rule? I recall in 2021, they were trying to limit them.
Yes, it's true. Actually, according to a new law they passed, I think around that day in 2020 or 2021, artificial feeding is not allowed. It's a little bit bizarre because, I mean, a lot of the feeders, I mean, a banana feeder, I have a banana feeder in my backyard, but at 5 meters distance, I have banana trees. So if the birds are feeding the bananas from the banana trees or from the feeder, I mean, I don't really see how this can impact negatively the birds. So it's a little bizarre why they're banning this. It has a lot to do with artificial hummingbird feeders, because in some places, I mean, putting out a hummingbird feeder with sugar water is a commitment. I mean, you really have to, especially here in Costa Rica, where the humidity is high and the temperature are high. If you don't clean your feeder every day, it will start to ferment, and you will start feeding alcohol to the hummingbirds, which obviously is not good. So it's more a reaction to those places who have hummingbird feeders that are not well taken care of. But the law is not really applied, so it's being tolerated again to have artificial feeders in Costa Rica, and I think it's a good thing because, I mean, for a lot of people, depend economically from these feeders. So it brings in money that they can use to conserve nature. If you go to Quetzal Paradise Lodge, they have a lot of artificial hummingbird feeders, which they clean every day. So, but because of the money that they can generate by attracting birders and photographers, they're able to conserve a huge natural area. So they have their own private reserve, which is only possible if tourism is possible, and part of the tourism, birding tourism and bird photography tourism, is feeders. So it helps to conserve also.
Good. And then Debbie wanted to know, are all of the 948 birds there year-round, or are there migratory birds included in that number?
Yes, there's migratory birds included. There's about 220 species are migratory birds. So most of the migratory birds are the one that breed in North America and Canada. So we're starting to lose them right now. They're starting to show up at your area now. So it includes all the migratory birds. It's all the species that have been reported in Costa Rica.
And I will have to say that some of the migratory birds, particularly the Tennessee warblers, they really took advantage of those bananas, Peters, when we were there.
Yes, we have at my feeder, I get Baltimore Orioles and summer tanagers also.
All right.
Okay, well, very interesting. And thank you
yeah.
so much, Peter.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank
And
you.
if-
We'll put it on YouTube and
Yeah, and if anybody wants to look at some of those birds again, so.